12 foods you will regret not buying before May 2026. Not because they will disappear immediately, but because when you realize you need them, you will no longer be able to buy them the same way. Right now, food prices in many places have already increased by about 15 to 25% over the past year. But what matters is not the number. It is how it happens. Quietly, little by little, you still see items on the shelf. But each time you come back, there is a little less choice, a slightly higher price, and you start buying what is left instead of what you want. More than 60% of food depends on transportation and continuous cold chains. When costs rise, the system does not collapse. It tightens. And that is when the problem appears. Not that you have no food, but that what you have no longer works the way it used to. Stay until number 7, because that is the moment most people do not prepare for. You still have enough food in front of you, but you begin to avoid it, delay it, and eventually skip meals. And when that happens, everything you prepared before begins to lose its value. 12. Canned tomatoes. You never think you need to stockpile canned tomatoes. And that is exactly why. You will run out of it first. Try to remember the last time you cooked without using it. Harder than you think. Someone once said they had plenty of food at home. Rice, meat, canned goods, everything. But after a few days, meals started to have a problem. Not a lack of quantity, but a lack of foundation. The food became dry, disconnected, lacking cohesion. And what they were missing was just a few cans of tomatoes. You still have food, but you can no longer cook the same way as before. Canned tomatoes are not the main dish. They are the binder. Sauces, soups, stews, pasta all need something to bring every ingredient together into a complete meal. Without it, everything you cook is just separate pieces. Edible, but not a meal. The problem is not that tomatoes disappear from shelves in a single day. It is that the supply is weakening at the source. California, which supplies most processed tomatoes, has faced drought pressure and water costs for years. There is no shock, only a slow shift that does not reverse. Prices rise gradually, choices shrink, and you only realize it when familiar options are gone. Canned tomatoes have a shelf life of about 18 to 24 months, and often last longer if the can remains intact, not dented, not swollen, no refrigeration needed, no special conditions. Just a cool, dry shelf. That is enough. A common mistake is buying only when needed. You go to the store, grab 1 to 2 cans for this week, and think that is enough. But that is also how you always buy, at today's price, instead of locking in a better price from the past. You are not short on money. You are just buying at the wrong time. The solution is not to stockpile heavily. Just maintain a rotation of 6 to 12 cans at home. Use 1 can, replace 1 can. You are not stockpiling, you are holding position. By May 2026, you will still see tomatoes on the shelf. But you will no longer buy them with the same feeling as before. And you will remember the time when a can of tomatoes was something you just grabbed, at a price you never had to think about. You will not regret not buying expensive items. You will regret ignoring something that used to be too cheap to care about. 11. White vinegar. You do not buy white vinegar when you need it. You buy it when it is already too late. Someone shared that they still had enough food at home, but after a few days, they started eating less. Not because they lacked food, but because the food became harder to eat each day. Rice turned dry, reheated dishes lost flavor, leftovers started to smell. you still had food, but you no longer wanted to eat it. The problem is not the lack of food, but the lack of a way to keep food edible. That is when white vinegar appears, not as an ingredient, but as a tool. With just 5 to 10 milliliters, you can balance flavor, tenderize food, and make old meals noticeably easier to eat. For preservation, with just a light layer of vinegar, you can extend food by 24 to 48 hours under normal conditions. With vegetables, you can soak them to keep freshness longer. With simple items like pickles, you are turning fresh food into something that can be used for days, even longer. You do not realize you are slowly losing food. You only notice that you are eating less. And this is the part many people overlook. Vinegar does not rise in price first. It always comes later. You do not notice because it is still cheap. But that is exactly why you always buy it at a higher price than before. You are not short on money. You are just rebuying things that used to be cheaper. When you start having to reuse old food, vinegar helps refresh the flavor. When you do not want to throw food away, it helps you extend a little more time. And when choices become fewer, it helps you turn what is left into something you can still eat. White vinegar has almost no expiration. You can store it for years without any change in quality. But its real value is not in how long it lasts, but in how it extends the life of other things: food, ingredients, and even your budget. The biggest mistake is only buying it when needed, and always buying at the current price. The solution is simpler than you think. Keep 1 to 2 unopened bottles at home. You are not stockpiling, you are maintaining control. Because there will be a time when you do not lack food, but you lack a way to keep it edible and not wasted. And at that moment, you will wish you had bought it, when it was still something so cheap it was not worth thinking about. 10. Popcorn kernels, you will walk past it without stopping. Because in your mind, it is just a snack, and that is exactly why you will underestimate it. Someone once said that during their hardest time, what helped them stay consistent was not meat, not expensive food, but dry corn. Not because it was delicious, but because it was something they could rely on every day. The problem is not that popcorn kernels will disappear from shelves. It is that the entire grain category is under pressure from production costs and weather. What you see today still looks abundant. In reality, has already started changing from behind. You do not lose it all at once. You gradually lose choices until only the more expensive options remain. Dry popcorn kernels can be stored for 10 to 20 years if kept sealed and away from moisture. But their real value is not in time. It is in efficiency. With just about 30 grams of kernels, you can create a serving that provides 100 to 150 calories. When adding oil or butter, this number can increase further. And with one large, low-cost bag, you can create dozens of servings, with a cost per meal lower than most foods in the supermarket. This is not a snack. This is one of the most affordable and stable energy sources you can buy. But the biggest mistake is choosing pre-packaged versions. Convenient, fast, but expensive and short-lived. Meanwhile, dry kernels give you more servings, longer duration, and less dependence on the system. You do not feel the pressure immediately. You just notice that the next time you return, the price is slightly higher. Then the next time, the choices are slightly fewer. And by the time you truly need a low-cost energy source, you realize everything has changed. When you no longer have many choices, you do not look for something good. You look for something enough. And this is the point many people overlook. Popcorn kernels do not require a complex system. Just a simple heat source, a small gas stove, an alcohol burner, or even a basic pot, and you can turn it into a quick, hot meal with enough energy to keep going. Storage is very simple. Place in an airtight container, avoid moisture, keep in a cool, dry place. A smart approach is to buy 2 to 3 large bags while prices are still low, then divide them for gradual use. You are not stockpiling. You are securing a stable energy source before it is no longer stable, because there will be a time when you are not looking for something good. You are only looking for something enough. And you will remember. There was a time when a simple bag of popcorn kernels was something you overlooked, just because you did not recognize its true value. 9. Canned fish. You think canned fish is just a backup. In reality, it is something you will need before you have time to prepare. You believe you can rely on fresh food, meat, fish, vegetables, but with just a small change, a power outage, hot weather, or simply food kept longer than expected, you start to hesitate. Not because you are out of food, but because you are no longer sure it is still safe to eat. And when certainty disappears, your options disappear with it. Canned fish is not better than fresh meat, but it is more stable. And in many situations, stability matters more than taste. A small can provide about 15 to 25 grams of protein, along with omega-3 and minerals. But its real value is not in the nutritional numbers. It is in having a food source you can open and use immediately. No electricity needed, no checking, no thinking. You are not paying for the fish. You are paying for certainty. In terms of price, this is something that increases in a way that makes you complacent. Not a sudden jump, but each time you return, slightly higher. Before, you could grab a few cans without looking at the price. Now you start to notice, but still think it is not significant. And that is when you fall behind. When meat prices rise, people shift to canned fish. When they shift, shelves do not empty immediately, but they thin out. Fewer choices, fewer familiar brands, and you start buying what is left. The urgent moment is not when you can no longer buy it. It is when you start realizing you should have bought earlier. Canned fish can last 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer if stored properly. That gives you an advantage few other foods have. You can buy ahead without worrying about waste. A simple approach is to always keep a moderate amount at home. Not to stockpile, but so you do not have to buy when conditions have already changed. Because at some point, you will not choose based on preference. You will choose based on safety. And you will realize what you once thought was unnecessary is exactly what you needed first. 8. Salt. You can cut back on many things in a meal. But there is one thing. If it is missing, everything starts to fall apart very quickly. That is salt. Not because you need it to make food taste good, but because your body needs it to function normally. And more importantly, your food needs it to last longer. Most people do not account for this. They prepare enough rice, enough canned goods, enough protein, but they do not think about how to keep those things from gradually going bad. Salt does not solve the problem immediately. It prevents the problem from happening. With just a small amount, you can slow down the spoilage process of food in some cases. Meat, fish, vegetables, when treated properly with salt, can last longer than usual. No equipment needed, no electricity. Just one very basic item. The danger is not that you do not have salt, it is that you do not have enough when you need to use more. When conditions change, you start using salt in different ways. Not just to season, but to preserve, to process, to avoid having to throw away what you already have. And that is when you realize its real value. Salt almost does not expire over time. If kept dry and sealed, you can store it for decades without losing its usefulness. It is one of the few things that time does not weaken. It only makes you forget how important it really is. The problem is, you do not prepare for things that are always there. You only react when they start to become insufficient. And at that point, you do not lack salt. You lack the ability to keep your food from being lost piece by piece. Storing salt is very simple. Avoid moisture, keep it sealed, store it in a dry place. No special conditions needed. The solution is not to stockpile heavily. Just make sure you always have more than you think you will use, because at some point, you will no longer see salt as a seasoning. You will see it as a tool. And you will understand why the simplest thing in the kitchen is what keeps everything else from disappearing too quickly. 7. Whole spices. You do not skip meals because you lack food. You skip meals because the food is no longer worth eating. That happens earlier than you think. There is a phase when many people still have enough rice, enough canned goods, enough energy, but they start eating less. Not because they are saving, but because every meal becomes the same, bland, dry, and gradually loses the desire to eat. The problem is not the quantity of food. It is that you no longer have a way to turn it into a meal. That is when whole spices become the most important thing that you overlooked. Unlike ground spices, which lose their aroma after just a few months, whole spices can retain flavor for 3 to 4 years, even longer if stored properly. Peppercorns, cinnamon sticks, star anise, cloves, small, light, inexpensive, but capable of completely transforming a dish with just a little freshly ground pepper, or by simmering a cinnamon stick. You can turn a simple dish into something with aroma, with flavor, with a sense of being new. And that is not luxury. It is how you maintain the ability to eat consistently. The real value of spices is not in nutrition, it is in psychology. When you still want to eat, you can maintain your energy. When you start losing appetite, you start skipping meals. And when you skip meals, all the preparation you made before starts to lose effectiveness. In terms of price, spices are one of the groups directly affected by imports. Most come from India, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia. When shipping costs and taxes rise, prices follow, not immediately, but inevitably. You do not notice it in a single purchase. You notice it after a few months. The biggest mistake is buying pre-ground spices for convenience. But you are trading short-term convenience for long-term loss of value. You buy more, use faster, and come back to buy again at a higher price. The urgent moment is not when spices disappear. It is when you realize you no longer want to eat what you have. Storage is very simple. Keep sealed, avoid light, avoid moisture. Nothing complicated. A smart solution is to switch to whole spices and only grind when needed. You are not stockpiling spices. You are preserving the ability to turn food into something you can still eat every day. Because at some point, the problem is not whether you have enough food. It is whether you still want to eat it or not. And if you lose that, you lose more than you think. You think you have prepared enough. But if today you only eat what is already in your home, how long can you eat before you start avoiding that meal? Not because you run out of food, but because you do not want to eat it. And that is something many people do not prepare for. A crisis does not begin with hunger. It begins when you no longer want to eat what you have. 6. Sugar. You do not need sugar to survive, but you will realize you need it sooner than you think. There is something that happens that few people prepare for. It is not a lack of food. but your body starts to dip unexpectedly. You still eat, still have calories. But there are moments when you feel suddenly tired, slowed down, unable to focus, and you do not understand why. That is not a lack of food. That is a lack of fast energy. Most of the foods you have, rice, dry goods, canned food, provide slow energy. Stable, but not enough to handle moments when your body needs to respond quickly. Fatigue, low blood sugar, stress, or simply when you cannot eat a full meal. That is when sugar becomes something you cannot replace. Just a small amount can change your state within minutes. No cooking needed. No preparation. No waiting. This is one of the few items on the list that can have an immediate effect. But the value of sugar is not only in energy. It keeps you going when you no longer want to eat. It keeps you alert when you start to get tired. And in many cases, it keeps you from giving up. In addition, sugar is one of the simplest natural preservatives. Jam, syrup, preserved fruit, all rely on sugar to extend shelf life. No equipment needed, no system required. Just the right ratio. Sugar almost does not spoil if kept dry and sealed. You can store it for years without losing its value. This makes it one of the most stable forms of stored energy. But this is the part many people overlook. You do not think you need to stockpile sugar, because you do not think about the moments when you no longer have enough energy to function normally. The urgent moment is not when you run out of food. It is when you start to feel yourself dip and have nothing to bring you back up immediately. The solution is very simple. Keep a small amount, enough to last over time. No need for much. Just enough so you do not fall into a state you cannot control. Because at some point, the problem is not whether you have enough to eat. It is whether you have enough to keep going or not. And when you reach that moment, you will realize what you once thought was unnecessary is exactly what keeps you from collapsing the fastest. 5. Cooking oil. You may have food, but without oil, you cannot turn it into a meal. It sounds simple, but try cooking a meal without oil. No frying, no sautéing, no fat, no heat retention. Everything becomes dry, burns quickly, and is harder to eat than you think. There is something few people notice. Oil is not just an ingredient. It is an energy carrier. Just 1 tablespoon of oil can provide far more calories than the same weight of other foods. That means you can add energy quickly without eating more. A major advantage when portions are limited or food becomes expensive. Oil also helps retain heat during cooking, allowing food to cook evenly, retain moisture, and more importantly, helps you make the most of simple ingredients. A little vegetable, a little starch, just add oil, and it becomes a complete meal. But this is the part many people overlook. Cooking oil depends heavily on global supply: sunflower, soybean, olive. When war, climate, or production is disrupted, oil prices do not rise immediately. They increase step by step. And you only realize it when the same bottle becomes noticeably more expensive after a few months. Oil has a shelf life of about 12 to 24 months, depending on the type. If stored in a cool place, away from light and heat, you can maintain its quality longer. The urgent moment is not when oil disappears. It is when you start cooking more often and realize its cost is rising faster than you expected. The smart solution is to always keep 1 to 2 bottles as backup. Not to stockpile, but so you do not have to buy when prices have already increased. Without oil, you do not lack food. You lack the way to eat it. Because at some point, the problem is not whether you have ingredients. It is whether you have a way to turn them into a meal or not. 4. flour, you think you need food. In reality, you need the ability to create food. There is a large gap between having food and being able to make food. Most people rely on things that are ready: cooked rice, canned goods, convenience foods. But when those options start to shrink, you will realize you are missing something more important: the ability to turn raw ingredients into something edible. That is when flour appears. Not as a supporting ingredient, but as a tool. With just flour, water, and a simple heat source, you can make bread, noodles, dough, crust, coating, creating something enough to eat, enough to keep going. No complex recipes needed, no special ingredients required. As long as you have flour, you can begin. 100 grams of flour provides about 350 to 370 calories. But that number is not the most important thing. Its real value lies in its ability to multiply. From a simple ingredient, you can create many servings, many types of meals, and extend the food supply you already have. Without flour, you only use what is left. With flour, you can create what comes next. That is the difference between being passive and being proactive. Flour does not help you survive for a day. It helps you avoid getting stuck when things begin to change. When you no longer have many choices, the ability to create a new meal from what you have becomes your greatest advantage. In terms of storage, flour can last 6 to 12 months under normal conditions, and longer if kept sealed, away from moisture and heat. No complex equipment needed, just control humidity. That is enough to maintain quality over time. The biggest mistake is only buying flour when you have a specific cooking plan. But when conditions change, you do not need a plan. You need options. The solution is simple. Always keep enough for longer than usual use. Not to stockpile, but so you are not limited by what is already available. Because at some point, the problem is not what you have to eat. It is whether you can create more or not. And when that happens, you will understand. The simplest thing in the kitchen is what opens the most options. 3. Multivitamins. You do not notice your body weakening on the day it begins. There is no clear sign, no moment that triggers an alert. You still eat, still function, still continue as usual. But something is changing in a direction you cannot control. You no longer choose food based on what your body needs. You choose based on price, convenience, and what is left. Less variety, fewer fresh foods, more repetition. And over time, your body adapts, but not in a better way. It does not become deficient immediately. It just declines gradually. You do not see a specific deficiency. You just feel that you are no longer the same. Not the same energy, not the same speed, not the same stability. Small tasks take longer. Tired days last longer, and you do not know why. The problem is not the amount of food, it is the smaller things. The micronutrients you cannot see but your body depends on every day. That is when multivitamins become a buffer, not to make you stronger immediately, but to keep you from getting weaker over time. One small pill each day does not change your today, but it keeps your tomorrow from slipping. This is not an immediate effect. It is a cumulative effect. After a few weeks, a few months, the difference begins to show if it is missing. And the danger is that you often realize it too late. Multivitamins typically have a shelf life of 1 to 2 years, stored in a dry place. Away from light is enough. No refrigeration needed, no dependence on systems, no space required. But they play a role that very few items on this list can replace. You do not need them when everything is still stable. You need them when things start to shift. And that is the point many people overlook. You cannot fully control what you eat during unstable periods, but you can control whether your body falls below the necessary level. You do not see yourself getting weaker. You just think you are more tired. The solution is very simple. Keep enough for a few months, not to boost health, but to maintain stability when your diet is no longer the same. Because at some point, the problem is not whether you eat enough, it is whether your body still functions the same or not. And when you notice that difference, it has already started before. 2. White rice foundation no one thinks about until they need it. You do not lack rice. You have just never thought you could rely on it completely. There is a very real pattern. When everything becomes more expensive, more complicated, harder to choose, people do not look for something new. They return to the simplest thing. And across almost every culture, that thing is the same. Rice, not because it is special, but because it is stable. Rice does not require complex storage, no refrigeration, no complicated preparation. You only need water and heat, and you can create a meal that is enough to sustain. But the real value of rice is not in feeling full. It is in keeping you from being dependent. When you have rice, you do not have to make constant decisions. You do not have to choose between price and quality. You have a stable foundation to rely on, no matter how other things change. One bag of rice can create dozens, even hundreds of servings. And when measured by cost per meal, it is one of the lowest you can find. Not because it is cheap, but because it is efficient. But this is what you do not notice. You still buy rice. But you buy out of habit, not strategy. You buy enough to use. You buy when you run out. And you always buy at the current price. The urgent moment is not when rice disappears from the shelf. It is when you start to realize everything else is rising in price. And rice becomes the only option that is still manageable. White rice can be stored 10 to 20 years if kept sealed, protected from moisture and pests. Even under normal conditions, you can keep it for a very long time without losing its value. The solution is not to stockpile excessively. It is to always have enough, so you are not forced to buy when conditions are no longer favorable. Because at some point, you will not look for something better. You will look for something more stable. And at that moment, you will understand what you once considered simple is exactly what helps you stand firm the longest. 1. Water, the only thing you cannot replace. You can lack many things and still manage. But there is one thing. If it is missing, everything stops immediately. It is not food, it is water. You do not realize the value of water because you always have it. You turn on the tap and it is there. You do not think, you do not prepare, but with just a small disruption, power outage, system failure, supply affected, you will see how quickly everything changes. You cannot cook, you cannot preserve, you cannot maintain your body. The value of water is not in nutrition, it is in the fact that everything else depends on it. You have rice, winter, but without water, you cannot cook it. You have food, but without water, you cannot keep it. You have everything, but without water, you cannot use it. An adult needs about 2 to 4 liters per day just to maintain basic function. Not to live well, just to avoid decline. But this is what most people do not do. They do not prepare in advance. Not because water is expensive, but because it is too cheap to think about. And that is exactly the most dangerous point. The urgent moment is not when you are thirsty. It is when you start asking yourself if tomorrow there is no water. What will I do? And if you do not have an immediate answer, then you are already too close to risk. Water does not need complexity to store. Just a few clean containers. Keep them in a cool place. Avoid light. Or even simpler, always have enough for a few days. You do not need much. You just need to not start from zero. Because in the end, everything on this list only exists if there is water. And when you realize that, you will understand why the simplest thing is the one that cannot be replaced. You do not need to prepare perfectly. You just need to not start from zero when things change. The items in this video are not rare, not expensive, but they are the ones you will think of first when they are no longer the same. People panic buy when shelves have already changed. Those who move early do one simple thing. Each time they shop, add a little more. No extreme stockpiling, no fear, just maintaining their ability to choose. If today you had to start with one item, what would you choose? Leave a comment. And if this video helped you see more clearly what you used to overlook, subscribe to stay one step ahead. In the next video, 9 canned foods gradually disappearing from shelves. Not because they are gone, but because those who prepare early are buying them very fast.